All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Ujjwal. I lead machine learning for healthcare and life sciences at AWS. And today I'm going to be joined by my two co-speakers from Gilead Sciences. Kevin Cox, who is the Chief Cloud Architect and Senior Director, and Jeremy Zhang, who is the Senior Director of Clinical Data Science and Advanced Analytics. And we are going to talk about how generative AI is transforming the life sciences industry. The session is going to be divided into three separate parts. Me kicking off this agenda by talking about how generative AI is being utilized by our customers in the life sciences space. We are going to switch to some key considerations and differentiations that AWS brings to the table for life sciences organizations. We are then going to invite our speakers from Gilead to talk about how they are transforming the business of Gilead with generative AI and AWS. I'm going to come back towards the end to conclude with a few talking points around best practices and how to use generative AI responsibly, because this is one of the things that is top in the minds of our customers. So I want to begin by saying that this field of generative AI has just taken off, and this is propelled not by just a few models or just a few things that you're seeing from the beginning of the year, but it's like a sustained effort that has continued over the years. Right from 2017, when we initially introduced the concepts of transformers, going into how they could be pre-trained and generate content, and now seeing a surge of applications that are all being utilized by that technology. This is propelled, of course, by the availability of a lot of data, models to choose from, and then all of the compute that propels all of this into creation of use cases and workflows that are truly meaningful for the businesses today. And the life sciences industry is no exception to this. We have seen the application of generative AI across the spectrum of life sciences use cases, starting from early research and discovery, where generative AI is really transforming the way drugs are discovered, with algorithms that can now predict the properties of proteins and different molecular structures. We can now also use generative AI in clinical development, where we are optimizing clinical trials using generative AI, where you see a lot of documentation, a lot of repeated work that are manually done are all being utilized to actually create operationally efficient workflows. We are also seeing the use of generative AI in the manufacturing space, where we are identifying things like false rejects or optimizing manufacturing processes through generative AI. In the commercial and medical affairs window, we are seeing use cases around patient outcome predictions and content generation, especially in the space of personalization. Each of this content is actually utilized in very different ways in different geographies and different personas. And generative AI is being utilized, and models is being utilized to actually create personalized experiences for all of these use cases. Finally, in the space of patient support, we see generative AI being used as a concierge, where patients are using algorithms and chatbots that are being front-ended by those algorithms. And this is all happening in the space of very user-friendly applications that are now available to these patients. Now, one of the biggest misconceptions we've heard from life sciences organizations and the way we have seen this industry progress is everyone is now chasing the size of the model. Everyone is thinking bigger is always better, but that might be true for a lot of use cases that are general. We have seen organizations utilize out-of-the-box model for use cases that summarize content that may not actually depend on domain-specific tasks, or create chatbots that are fairly generic about the knowledge about their world. But what we really feel is the differentiation in the life sciences space, especially when you go into really, really deep domain-specific use cases, is your ability to fine-tune on your domain-specific data. And that is where we see some differentiation coming from early research, like this one that was published by MIT, going into some of the things that we have launched, you might have heard earlier today, about how we are making all of these as possibly the easiest things to do so that you are able to differentiate by your data and fine-tuning these models to your use cases. In fact, it's not only the model. Model is just one of the things. What we really want you to think about is the choice of generative AI and the way you construct it is dependent on a good balance between three different things. Starts with the quality. And quality does not always mean more verbose responses, or it doesn't mean a more accurate model for one type of a problem, but the kinds of problem that you are really looking to build. It also depends on the cost. As we are seeing more and more POCs that we were initially executing, making it into production, organizations are feeling the need to actually run them at scale in production with a cost-efficient, in a cost-efficient manner. And as you grow larger, the models grow larger, the latency also plays a very important role because large models take time to actually generate inference. So a true generative AI strategy should actually take into account all of these three different parameters and make sure that the right model is utilized for the right use cases, and only then you can create a differentiation. Now, let me walk you through an example of this. This is an example that we created as a prototype to demonstrate how exactly organizations are using generative AI in the healthcare and life sciences space. This is called Health Agent. This is a prototype that we have recently developed. And Health Agent allows you to connect both internal and external data sources and create meaningful responses in a conversational manner. What Health Agent does is utilizes the capabilities of agents and large language models that are built on top of Bedrock and be able to create this in a conversational way by preserving context. Let me play this video and show you what I mean. Let's take a scenario of a hypothetical patient called John 100. I have John 100's clinical records sitting in Health Lake, which is our EHR data store. I have John 100's medical imaging records sitting in Health Imaging. And I have his omics records sitting in Health Omics. These are purpose-built healthcare and life sciences storage services that are created by AWS. We are now being able to create a workflow where you can interrogate a patient's, in this case, John 100's clinical records, their imaging records, and their genomic records, and cross-reference those with public data sources like PubMed, clinicaltrials.gov. We can also look up gene annotations from public gene databases and do that in a conversational manner. So this is an assistant that can sit on the side of a researcher or a physician who's now looking at all of these different personas and different patients and trying to determine what is the best outcome for that patient. Here in this case, you can see that this patient is clearly very sick. He's got a variety of conditions starting from mostly cardiac related. And one of the things that we notice is in his genomic profile, we have found a variant that may be contributing to these conditions. And some of the researchers who are doing research on that variant can actually figure out what medications or what therapies can actually target that variant. In this case, I found out a variety of things that this patient can benefit from, including a clinical trial that is recruiting patients with similar conditions. One of the things we would always also want to do is probably figure out if there are any known therapies that targets that variant. All of this are things that are not possible to be done by a single large language model. But by using the capability of agents that take all of these as separate workflows and then orchestrate them with a large language model allows you to create such workflows. And this is happening, for multiple years at AWS, right from the time when we started in the machine learning journey with the launch of SageMaker. We have seen an immense adoption of that service for a variety of use cases in the life sciences space. And it's resulted in the fact, in a true testament, that 9 of the top 10 pharmaceutical organizations are actually relying on AWS for their machine learning and analytics needs. This is propelled majorly by a few key tenets that we have heard from customers. And this is a testament of how we are actually working backwards from all of those key points and creating services that address those. One of the things that we've repeatedly heard from customers is, why is it so difficult to fine-tune and train a model? We want to make that easy. Remove the undifferentiated heavy lifting around that. The other thing that we see organizations really care about is their data. Their data is their IP. You cannot actually give away your data. And if you're not differentiating with your data in these large language models, there's not a lot of differentiation you can create. The other thing that we have heard from customers is they want to see apps that actually increase productivity instead of just training and fine-tuning models to no end. You need to create workflows that understand the usage of that large language model and is able to create meaningful productivity in end user workflows. And then lastly, when organizations think about deploying things into production, cost plays a very important role. And cost reduction should not come at the expense of bad performance. So keeping the ratio of cost to performance as meaningful as possible is also a very key tenet from all of the things that we have done. And this is happening through the launch of Amazon Bedrock. It's generally available. It's a service that allows you to create APIs on a variety of workflows with a choice of foundation models that you can use from. You can also privately customize these foundation models with your own data. This includes both customization with labeled data sets and also with continuous pre-training. And it has a range of foundation models, starting from the AI21 series, the Cohere series models from Jurassic series models from AI21. We have the Claude models from Anthropic, the Command model from Cohere, and we also have the Llama models that are available from Meta. Finally, for your image generation needs, we have the Stable Diffusion model and our own models, the Titan Text and Titan Embedding. All of these are available as easy-to-use APIs that you can then integrate into your workflows and create workflows like the ones that I showed you earlier with Health Agent. OK, with that, I would now like to invite Kevin up on stage to talk about how they are using these services to create meaningful workflows at Gilead. Kevin?
Thanks, Ujwal, and thanks everybody for coming today. I know it's a late session. You're probably hoping to get to dinner soon, but I wanted to share a little bit about Gilead's journey so far with generative AI. So my name's Kevin Cox. I'm the Chief Cloud Architect with Gilead, and I just want to start off by asking you, it's going to be hard for me to see, but how many of you are experimenting or deploying generative AI solutions in your organization? That's incredible. There's clearly a lot of interest in this area. And I'm personally very excited about the potential for this technology to really have an impact on the healthcare and life sciences industry. Now, at Gilead, our mission is to eradicate diseases in the areas of virology, oncology, and inflammatory. And we've made great strides. We've delivered a cure for hepatitis C. We've transformed the treatment and prevention of HIV, and we're taking on cancer with patient-centric solutions such as CAR T cell therapy. But that's just the beginning, and we know this all starts with our drug pipeline. We're investing in world-class science and technology to really meet our goal of delivering 10 or more transformative therapies to the market by 2030. And we know we can't do this alone. We rely on a wide network of partners. In the area of oncology alone, we have over 40 partners, relationships with organizations and other companies to deliver on these innovations. And we've established a culture within Gilead where our employees feel empowered that they're really making a difference in bringing the world more healthy. So we fundamentally believe that continuing to invest in our data, AI, and ML capabilities is going to be critical to meeting our goals going forward. Now, we've already built a data mesh within Gilead that allows all of our lines of business to curate, contribute, and consume data products from other groups in a governed yet broad way. And we're aligning the needs of the businesses into our platforms, into our data and cloud platforms going forward. And our goal is really to enable our data scientists to leverage these tools that they love, like SageMaker and Databricks, to be able to leverage them in a self-serve, modular fashion. And this approach, as you can see from this quote from our CIO, has broad support across our organization. And we're leveraging data all the way from research all the way to commercialization of our products. Now, none of this would be possible without our partnership with AWS. We've had a long usage of AWS, but we've really increased our partnership over the past couple of years. We decided to become a cloud-first organization, and we've migrated the majority of our applications from our data centers into the AWS cloud. We've established a cloud platform as well as a data and analytics platform that allows us to innovate and build on new capabilities. This year, we also deployed an enterprise SAP solution, as well as we're building an HPC solution for research. And we're just going to continue to innovate because we have this foundation. We're able to innovate leveraging technologies such as generative AI. Now, sometimes technology can feel like a hammer looking for a nail. That's not the case with generative AI. With life sciences, there's some key opportunities that are ripe for this technology. So traditionally, because our industry is so regulated with standards such as GXP, we've traditionally relied on manual, inefficient processes. And that tends to generate a lot of documentation, a lot of unstructured data. And because of that data is unstructured and stored in document repositories, it's hard to glean insights from that information. It's hard to improve our processes going forward and have it be an intelligent, automated system. To add to the complexity, life sciences and healthcare data is very complex, and we often have to apply ontologies on top of the data to make sense of it. Now, we've heard a lot of use cases from our business teams where they're sort of hungry to use this technology. So, for example, our medical affairs team, there's an example that shows there where they want to glean insights from the data that they have. They've got tons of data. They want to be able to use natural language and ask questions of their data without having to build complex pipelines, data pipelines, and analytic dashboards. Another example is from our commercial team, where they want to be able to jumpstart new content, right? They want to, because they have all of this existing, a treasure trove of information, they want to use that to be able to generate new content and make their work more efficient so that they can focus on what it is that they're trying to accomplish. So why did we choose to partner with AWS on generative AI? Well, there's three main reasons. The one is this is a natural extension to the platform that we already have established on AWS. Our data is there. Most of our compute is there. And the second reason is AWS has broad experience with this technology. And they're innovating. I mean, you've seen from the announcement this week, they're bringing a lot of new services to bear that we can quickly leverage to jumpstart our efforts. And the third reason is AWS is deeply partnering with us to enable our teams. They're running workshops to help us identify use cases with the various lines of business. They're providing education. They're giving us early access to services. And they're helping us run proof of concepts to try out these technologies and prove the business value. Now, we're really starting to see the value from this effort so far. We're able to unlock insights from our data. We're able to streamline our work. And it's really because of this foundation that we've established. We have a strong cloud foundation where teams can self-service and spin up new workloads within their own accounts. And we have chargeback mechanisms to make sure that they're accountable for the work that they're doing. The data platform is, again, it's a data mesh where teams can build and deploy data products that other teams can leverage. And we have built-in data quality standards in that platform as well. Now, on top of that foundation, we're building our Gen AI capabilities, where we're enabling the data science tools that the scientists already love and use to be able to leverage these foundational model services that AWS provides. So the way that we got started with it this year is we established a reference architecture for AI, and then we also defined some standards and guidelines for teams to follow. And I would just want to highlight a few of the areas on this slide. The first one is that we ensured that teams kept their data and the execution of the models within the Gilead cloud. Now, this is critical because we don't want our data to accidentally be exfiltrated into some LLM that's on the internet. We've all seen those news stories, and Gilead does not want to be one of those companies. The second area is around cost optimization. So we've really coached teams to start simple and then lead more into complex, right? So start with a foundation model, do prompt engineering, use RAG-type approaches to gain insights from Gilead data sets, and then do more advanced capabilities if that doesn't meet your needs. The other thing that we're doing is leveraging hosted services whenever we can. So we're heavily using Amazon Bedrock in a lot of our use cases, and we found great success. The other thing is the model choice, right? Because Bedrock gives us access to so many models, we're able to pick the right model for the right use case. Now, the third area is legal and security. Now, those are never fun topics, but it's sort of a necessary evil in this space because we want to make sure that we're complying with all of the security requirements and also that we're complying with IP regulations for the content that's being used and consumed. Now, the way that we've starting to scale these generative AI solutions is in a two-phase approach. On the left-hand side, we've started an innovation factory where we are identifying proof of concepts and use cases with different lines of business, and we're centrally creating a registry of those use cases so that we ensure consistency. We're running workshops with those teams, and we're getting education out to them so that they know how to use the tools in a responsible way. We're then using our partners to help build out these proof of concepts quickly and distribute them out to a small set of users to try out the technology and make sure that it has business value. Now, once we've identified some use cases where we are seeing real potential, that's when we move more into the traditional product side, where we're moving these solutions into our software development lifecycle, where we do our standard build, test, deploy, and run. Now, there's obviously some unique components to generative AI solutions, such as making sure that we have a solid data pipeline so that we can, operate this at scale. But in general, we're following our best practices that we already have in place for AI solutions and applications in general. Now, underpinning all of this is we're establishing an AI Center of Excellence with cross-functional representation to make sure that we're deploying these solutions in a responsible way. Now, I just want to walk through a couple of, out of all of this work, we've seen a couple of patterns emerge. So I just want to talk about just two of those patterns real quickly. The first one is question and answer, right? This is a chat bot where users want to be able to interact with Gilead data in a natural language conversational style. And some examples of this are, we've got Gilead internal standards documents that, are very difficult to find information. And so, we fed those into a model and deployed that as a solution so teams can quickly find information. Now, this is a very, specific architecture, and I understand there's a million ways you can build these things, but I wanted it to get real quick and just show you an example of a solution that we deployed within Gilead for this type of RAG approach. And RAG stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation. Right, so this is, again, the type of solution where you can build a chatbot, open-ended conversational style on top of our Gilead data. Now, for other use cases where it's more hardened, we need a specific answer return, we have other enterprise solutions for that. Now, the benefits of this approach is it avoids hallucinations, and it also allows us to include references to where the information was found, which is critical. So this architecture starts with documents being uploaded into a knowledge base, and then we index that information so that when a search comes in, we can query against past questions that have been asked and return that information if it matches. If not, we then go into our index, look for documents, sections of the documents that match that answer, feed that into an LLM in Bedrock, and then that generates a summarized response that goes back to the user. The second pattern is sort of an extension of the first, and it's a little bit more of an advanced use case where we want to not only go against unstructured documents, but we want to pull in other structured data and also do broader summarization and potentially content generation as well. Some examples of this are summarizing Gilead research papers. So our research team has a treasure trove of information. They want to be able to identify new targets, and this is a tool that we're using to be able to do that. The other example that I mentioned earlier from our commercial team is creating new marketing material based on previous product releases. So this pattern, you'll see the main differences are on the bottom, we have a broader set of data, right? So we can pull in structured and unstructured data, and we're creating a vector store using the embeddings from a large language model so that we have more control over the data and how it gets matched in the index. The other thing you'll see is we've got multiple LLMs in this architecture, so we can use the right model for the right phase in this architecture. So the execution phase, we're looking for information retrieval, a model that does that the best. Then we have a second phase where once we've retrieved the information, we can actually verify using an LLM to verify that it actually answered the question correctly. So this is an extension of the first, and again, we're building this solution as we speak for the research team. So at this point, I want to hand it over to Jeremy so that he can talk about how we're using generative AI in the clinical space.
Thank you, Kevin. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Jeremy Zhang. I lead AI for drug development at Gilead. So as Kevin mentioned earlier, Gilead is actually a pretty large company now. It grew really rapidly during the pandemic. We're a very global company, and in development, you have clinical site partners, MSLs, local affiliates all over the world. So it's not just when you're building systems, technology, solutions, especially in the data science space, you're not just building stuff very US-centric, even though a lot of our real-world data, medical claims, electronic medical records are mostly US-based. We have a lot of data in the US, but we really have to consider how the solutions that we're building and the optimizations that we're bringing to clinical programs and portfolio programs, how the insights and the evidence that's being generated is being used broadly globally. And that's something that I think a lot of data scientists that mainly concern themselves with technology, there's a lot of stuff in this domain that you really have to think about when you're developing solutions. And now going into a large language model, GPT, like generative AI space, they're really front and center, especially in the EU where regulation is coming swiftly for a lot of the things that we're trying to do now. So at Gilead, as Kevin mentioned, we are very much concerning ourselves not with just bringing transformative therapies to people, but also cures. A little while ago, we brought a medication for HCV to bear where we, for all intents and purposes, were able to cure hepatitis C, and we're looking forward to doing the same thing for HIV and HPV. And our mission is to create a healthier world for people. And, data science is very much part of this. When you think about what Gilead as a company is trying to do and its mission, I think data has been something that we've used since our founding, right? Biostatisticians, you can think of them as the earliest data scientists. But now with technology like large language models, generative AI, and just more broadly applying AI, not only for, boosting the efficiency of your workers, but to drive competitive advantage, that's something that we're becoming more and more aware, especially in the clinical space. So our transformation is very much underway. For some of you guys in the crowd that are from other pharma or biotech companies, Gilead traditionally as a virology company. So we've mostly focused, being founded in the Bay Area on the HIV pandemic or HIV epidemic, and that's been our legacy, our history. But as Gilead has moved into oncology, into a more competitive environment in lung, breast, colorectal cancer, when you move into that kind of space, you can no longer rest on what has brought you to where you are, but now you're, going up against some of the companies that you guys work at and trying to compete in a very crowded space, especially in antibody drug conjugates, immuno-oncology. And AI for us in the clinical space is becoming a differentiator. It's becoming something not just interesting that we use to boost efficiency, to find documents, but to design clinical trials, to optimize protocols, to reach community centers and sites and key investigators that are competition may be overlooking. So that's how we envision AI will make a difference and drive competitive advantage for us in clinical. So as Kevin mentioned earlier, our ambition does span 3 therapeutic areas. That virology has been our legacy. I think with COVID-19, like we used a ton of real-world data to drive a lot of value there. But now looking forward, I think in oncology and especially continuing our mission in inflammatory disease areas like NASH, AI is becoming more and more part of our working norms and not just interesting use cases that we execute. But how do we get this done? Like, what's the secret sauce? So I'll try to share with you guys as much as our legal team is going to allow me to. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about clinical development. I think Kevin mentioned quite a number of use cases already. In clinical development, what we've realized is that tackling some of the common use cases like RAG, which is like kind of played out if you really think about it, although it's only been like less than a year, I guess. But like, how do you build stuff that's fit for purpose and actually going to drive value? Things that you can create to provide augmentations, to provide recommendations, to actually author protocols, to enable clinicians and MSLs who really don't want to sit down at your chatbot and ask it questions. How do you deliver those insights in a way that your medical doctors and your clinicians will respect and then actually utilize for their protocol creations, for their trial designs, for the way that they execute clinical trials and select sites and work with scientific partners globally? That's really what we're trying to solve. So with that, I'm going to go dive a little bit into our use cases and show you guys some of the cool ways in which we are leveraging Amazon, AWS, its services to drive value with LLMs and generative AI today. So there's really 3 key ways if I really want to break it down, okay, so there's a lot of different use cases, but how do you prioritize and figure out what's actually going to make a difference and move the ROI needle, right, for data science teams, move the ROI needle for the study teams, the program and portfolio teams that you're actually working with. So these 3 key ways are accelerating data management tasks. Doesn't sound sexy, but believe it or not, one of the key ways we use AI is in data engineering. The second way is augmenting decision-making. Physicians, clinicians, MSLs, they're still the lifeblood of how we run our programs, right? And today, you're not really going to have like some kind of generative AI model replace endpoint selection or which biomarkers you're going to use between your phase 2 and phase 3. That's still very much a decision that belongs with your development lead. So a lot of the ways that we're using generative AI is to just make augmentations to help them with their decision-making. And the last thing is increasing efficiency of tasks. Kevin mentioned many of those use cases, like RAG search, translating documents, information extraction, ontologies. There's various different ways you can use generative AI models to just boost little efficiencies here and there. And that really stacks up. I think finding information is something that a lot of pharma companies, biotech struggle with. You don't have just internal data, but a lot of external data. You're buying data from Sightline, from global data, from all kinds of different data vendors. It's like, how do you get all that together and make sense of what's the actual insight that you should be making your decisions off of? So I'm going to dive into like a system that we built in the last year to optimize clinical trials. And a lot of what I'm showing here, you'll realize like how we're like using the various different LLM technologies in multiple different areas. So before that, a discussion on generative AI or AI in general in pharma is not complete without talking about regulations. So I'm talking about that a little bit. So there are some key challenges that we face in our industry that isn't unique. There's other regulated industries, but I think the stakes are higher, right? Because if we mess up, it's patients who will feel that impact. There's trust, explainability, there's safety concerns, there's privacy. Traditionally, we've segregated data. We have primary, secondary use, and we go to sleep at night understanding that we have good data governance and that the right teams are using the right data. But with large language models, if you're not careful, you can combine that data together, and you can actually reveal information from disparate data sources, make those connections, and actually reveal private information. So it's very dangerous to put these kinds of capabilities in the hands of analysts or data scientists who aren't aware of how those connections can create those privacy concerns, which is something that we're very, very keenly aware of in R&D. I put regulatory or lack thereof. I think that's not fair. I created this slide before Biden did his executive order. But it's coming, right? At some point, I think on Monday I had a chance to see a presentation from some of our Bay Area colleagues at Stanford, and there was some discussion around the California Attorney General going to different companies and asking them to show what they're doing with AI, right? Like, that it is coming. I think California might want to take the lead on that, but even nationwide, and especially with EU AI Act and FPA making moves here, the regulations are coming, and some of the technologies we're using, like if you look at GPT-4, that could be illegal if there are now regulations around how much emissions large language models are creating. So I think teams, especially in our space, that are looking at fine-tuning models or leveraging open source large language models from providers such as Amazon Bedrock, need to be aware of each individual model and what the implications are. It's no longer just a conversation about whether your legal team allows you to use it, whether the IP is there, but also what the EU AI Act thinks about it and what the FDA or NIST or other regulatory bodies think about it too. Cost and scale, I think Kevin and Ujwal both touched on that. That is a concern, right? I think there's big numbers being thrown around about the cost of large language models, but that is being pushed down. Like recently we had a chance to talk to one of our partners about what it would take to fine-tune a 13 billion parameter model. And it's actually in the $10,000 range, so it's not out of reach for companies, pharma companies. Lastly, expertise and talent. I think the number one limiting resource, at least that I've noticed in our industry, isn't compute, actually, it's talent. It's very difficult to convince data scientists who could easily get another job in the Bay Area to come to a pharma company where they're going to see a lot more restrictions around the data, right? So with all these challenges within development, we've really scaffolded or structured our use cases into three different areas, and we have to make a decision. The first is foundation models. And even there, you have to think about some key questions before you can rush into using FMs, right? And these are just a few, but I would use them as an example. Foundation models are great because they allow you to go fast. Like for me to have somebody from my team even download something from Hugging Face and then put it on a model registry and have it connect to an app, and that's a lot of steps. But something like Bedrock, a foundation model service, can get you from point A to point B and at least get you going on a POC much faster. But what we've noticed, and my data scientists tell me this all the time, it's dude, the big foundation models just don't perform as well as BioBERT. And it's true, a lot of our use cases, you download a much smaller model that's domain specific from Hugging Face, and it will drastically outperform a large foundation model. And yeah, it's totally true. So you have to really think about, if you're going to fine tune, what's the cost? And also, there's various different healthcare life science foundation models that are smaller models that are being built for task specific things. And a lot of times, those are better than your large general models. Lastly, DIY. This is probably the hardest thing because a lot of really good real world data, medical records are from vendors, and they're becoming increasingly aware of that as a revenue source. So contracts with real world data vendors are becoming more and more complicated because maybe they don't want to let you train your own large language model. And then internally, to gather our own data, we have to be aware of, if we train our own large language model and some of our proprietary data, if that ever leaked, and there's the information leakage, is that a security risk? And then, so the cost is only one of those considerations. I think security is also something for DIY that you have to be super aware of. All right, so in drug development, we have a lot of different use cases, right? Evidence generation, biostatistics, stats programming, creating tables, figures, lists for trials. In development, we decided that we wanted to pick a business process, right? A less risky one to really pilot and see how we can drive a lot of value with LLMs. We looked at from study approval to post-market monitoring, what in between the development of a program and then the marketing as well as the sell-through and the manufacturing, what are some of the steps that we can kind of address initially that would be less risk? For us, we chose protocol design, trial execution, which is an extremely common use case in our space. And then lastly, being in the data science team, there's a lot of data management as well as data analysis, things like biomarkers, multi-omics analysis, multimodal fusion that a lot of AI AI technology can be used for now. So we picked these 3 areas, and I'll talk about some of them today and show you how we're driving some of that value. So how do we do this? This isn't rocket science. Like, just because large language models are involved, you still need data. Actually, I'll go more in depth on the next slide. Every single large language model project starts with data engineering, right? So for us, like, our strategy was, we need to think about 3 things. The first is, what is our data strategy? Like, if we're going to set out on a project to use the large language models to drive value, where's the data and how are we going to manage that? And now we have to think about things like vector stores. Like, the data strategy, a foundational common data model for that project is necessary. The second piece is the actual AI. And we made a very specific decision early on in the development space that we wanted to own this IP. So we became very aware of even foundation model services, like where they were playing. The AI models that we were going to use to optimize clinical trials would be our own. And lastly, it's all about execution, right? You build the best models, you build the best bot or whatever. If your clinician or your study team, the clinical program manager, the PSL, like, if they don't want to use your app, like, you're pretty much not driving any value. So how you actually deliver those insights to your study teams, to the portfolio, the program teams, is extremely important. So about a year ago, we decided that we wanted to kind of change the paradigm around how we optimize clinical trials. We were going to skip just doing reporting, and we decided that we wanted to see if we could use AI to augment a lot of the decisions around study feasibility, protocol design, and the execution of the clinical trial. So from end to end, we aggregated both internal and external data from some of the common ones, metadata, Healthverity, some partners that many of you are probably working with. We combined that with our internal clinical data, EDC, IXRS, other systems, as well as operational data, contracting costs. And we created what we call a common data model. It's an operational strategy model. It's a very common data paradigm, right? We had 3 different layers. We had raw, curated, business. We called it bronze, silver, and gold. Ultimately, what we wanted to do was create a fit-for-purpose data model, a combination of clinical and real-world data that would become the engine of our AI. And we had a longer-term vision that this wouldn't just be for the execution of clinical trials, but also the design of trials, the design of programs. So we leveraged a bunch of AWS services. Like, if I drew that diagram for you, it would probably span multiple pages. But some key ones, like S3, obviously, for data lakes, RDS, Airflow. And we made a really specific decision early on that we were going to use Databricks. So one of the things that we noticed, like, as we built this app and we started using it with study teams, was that, believe it or not, the development of drugs is a conversation. Like, you don't just create a report, send it to somebody, and then they just, like, use the data. The data gets discussed, right? It's a cross-functional discussion between regulatory affairs, medical affairs, your clinicians, your CRO, the CTM. It's like a room or a Zoom call full of people, and they're all talking about these insights that you're generating. And we're like, well, wait a minute, that's like multiple meetings. People are busy. You got to find time. Like, the actual number of days that it takes to have these discussions is becoming a limiting factor. So we decided to work with AWS, with Bedrock, to essentially create a chatbot. It's kind of a chatbot, but it's a way for you to interrogate clinical protocols and do natural language query that allows you to replace that conversation, some of that conversation at least, with conversations with AI. So then that way you can identify the right clinical trial comparators, you can get the right cohorts, you can get the right data sets, and skip some of those conversations that would normally have to happen. Or at least the data science teams that's using these tools can dive down to what the protocol design currently is at a much faster rate than having to constantly have meetings with the cross-functional teams. So we built this application. So it's not just a data set or a data lake. It's actually a Python app that we created in parallel with the data foundation and all the modeling and connections to Bedrock. And it's being used across our portfolio in oncology, virology, as well as inflammation. OK. Oh, I did want to make a plug. Like, we also use it to optimize the diversity of clinical trials. Many of you guys know, starting in January, the FDA is going to be very concerned about that. So our models not only take into account things like enrollment rate and dropouts and cost of trials, but whether or not we can actually recruit diverse populations that represent the real-world data or real-world evidence cohorts for the protocol design. So the generative AI, I like to think of it as something like, when you think about a chatbot in a conversation, it feels like something for efficiency. But what I like to think of it as, and I think our research team is also doing this, as Kevin mentioned, it's really an analysis tool. Like, it helps you analyze the data in ways that you never thought before. Like, I'm showing you some of the questions that we can now ask our optimization tool. Things like, I only want first-line patients, right? That my therapy is first line. Remove all the data that's related to metastatic conditions. I only want phase 2 studies. Please include indications for similar drug studies, right? Only recurrent conditions. Like, you don't even have to filter now across, if you've ever used Sightline or clinicaltrials.gov, there's all these filters. You can just use English language to talk to these protocols and get exactly what you're looking for. So here I have just an example for an oncology study from Gilead, how this data actually looks. Okay, so this data foundation that we built, like I said, there's a longer-term vision, right? We created this product for clinical trial optimization, but it's really supposed to be for more than just that. So combining all this internal, external data, our vision was to create a platform, so to speak, and a way to have all these partner services and data services, and then use it for other stuff. So we use it for our trial optimization app, but we're now also using it for a lot of other interesting and new things, such as design and optimization of the protocol. We're also looking at multi-omics, so leveraging radiographic biomarkers, real-world data, genomics profiling together into like a combined data model of patients. So there's a lot of really cool ways we can now use this common data model for. So this is just one piece of advice for me. Like, if you're thinking about embarking on creating something like this, have a vision towards other use cases that could potentially be useful in your area. So here's just an example of the same paradigm that we created and how, and again, it's not rocket science. Many of you probably have the same paradigm, but how we're now not just using it for structured data, clinical and real-world data, but just completely like the Wild West of unstructured data. Like, we've got public APIs, PDF parsing, OCR of images, radiographic biomarkers, and other kinds of imaging modalities. And we're able to use the same paradigm to then create ontologies, extract information, use generative AI across the entire thing, right? Not just for chatbots, but also for the data engineering aspects, and then deploy data sets and applications and tools that optimize KOLs, trial protocols, look at publications, and create scientific knowledge graphs. So these are just some of the these are mostly in the POC stages. Some of them are heading into actual use. But creating this paradigm has created an explosion of the different ways that we can leverage generative AI large language models and then use that on actual business cases that will move that ROI needle. Okay, so with Bedrock, like I said, we realized that the development of drugs is not one data set or report. It's a conversation with your cross-functional stakeholders, and that's a lot of the way that we're using it. So we're using it for a natural language query, which I think is a huge paradigm for us. Like, many of you are probably using real-world data and probably spending a lot of money on transforming that real-world data into different common data formats. Imagine if you don't have to actually do that, which will bring the cost of your data engineering on AWS down, but then you can leverage large language models to do things like zero-shot matching between clinical protocols and patient profiles, or replace the laborious effort of creating patient concepts and cohorts with natural language query. Like, these are just some of the ways that we are now looking at using Bedrock and other large language models to try to drive even more efficiency. Domain-specific entity extraction. So just the domain specificity of the large language models is so important to us. We realized very early on that we can drive a lot of efficiency by having data scientists understand which domain models are good, and that's improving all the time. We do a lot of chat with Bedrock. Synthetic data creation is something that we're looking at, and it's really interesting. One of the biggest barriers to things like using AI for radiology or pathology is just how much data you have access to. Like, typically on a trial, you're not going to get that many subjects, especially if it's still in the early stages, like in the phase 2, going into phase 3. So creating synthetic data using large language models for your radiographic biomarker modeling is actually quite efficient and can allow you to do things to de-risk trials that you could not simply do because you just didn't have enough data. All right, so last thing I'm going to end with before I pass it back to Ujwal is just like the broader vision of what you want to do with AI in this kind of space. It's not just about creating, the one use case, and you're like, all right, that's good, that's large language model. But if you have like your eye on these other use cases, and these are just some of the different ways, many of them leveraging Bedrock and obviously on AWS, we've now created in a short year, about a year's time, many different models that optimize the way we conduct trials. And we're using multiple different NLQ applications, optimizing costs, IEs, optimizing for different indications, TA and indication-specific modeling. And all of that has kind of taught us that having that longer-term vision and that tighter coupling between the business case and what you're actually doing with the technology is really what's going to move the needle on driving ROI with the AI capabilities. Cool. So I'd like to invite Ujwal back up to the stage to finish the talk.
Thanks. Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you, Kevin, for sharing all of these important insights. As you might have seen throughout the theme of this talk, generative AI is actually at the tipping point, but don't forget all of the key important things that you have to build to create meaningful generative AI applications. I know this is not as cool as the end user applications that you might be interested in developing, but having the ability to create foundational models and analytics and have a solid data strategy is extremely important. That is why we have a comprehensive set of services for creating your data foundations, starting from ingestion services that allow you to ingest a variety of data and store them centrally in data lakes, ability to query them, not worrying about the modality, the size of the data. What we are believing that the world is moving towards is a future where you don't have to consider barriers on storing a variety of data and then querying and generating insights from them. What we are trying to do is create APIs, create services, that all of that abstracts in terms of the potential that you can create with applications by directly for end users. And that is where we see the success of machine learning come in. When you have a solid data strategy coupled with a choice of models and all of the things that you can do with machine learning on that data, that is where the true transformation happens. The other very important thing that we have to keep in mind is the ability for creating generative AI responsibly. As Jeremy mentioned in his talk, there is a lot of regulatory aspects that come into play over here, especially for a highly regulated industry like pharmaceuticals. You have to think about how to avoid the dangers and the pitfalls of generative AI when you're building with this technology. That is why we have kept, at the core of our services, we have kept this idea of creating generative AI responsibly. This is happening through the launch of services, which we are putting in the hands of our customers, who are then using it to validate and build proof points for regulatory agencies, who can then interrogate all of that report, all of that data that we give them. Doing this in a transparent manner is extremely important as well. A lot of these models cannot explain why they are generating something. They have the ability to hallucinate. How do you control all of this is extremely important use cases that go into decision making where a life can be impacted. That is why we have services that allow you to create specific metrics, look at which models is better than the other. In fact, having a choice of the model is extremely critical in such use cases. Having the ability to tie all of that and do proper enablement, because this field is also very, very new, is also something that we consider extremely important. We do this through a variety of webinars, immersion days, teaching sessions that generate awareness, and make sure that all of this technology, while is broadly available, is also putting proper guardrails and proper utilization of it. Lastly, we are investing in science. We are making sure that our own scientists are creating methods and publishing them for everyone to consume, and making all of those methods, keeping central element of generative AI being used responsibly. All of this, again, translates to the benefit of our products. We launch those products as services so that it can benefit you when you access them and build applications on top of it. So I want to end by a key takeaways from the talk. Try to make sense of everything that you've heard and some key talking points and best practices. Starting with generative AI is evolving very fast. We are still in step one of this. There's a lot that will happen over the years, And one of the things that we want to advise organization is to think about a strategy that allows you to quickly change. And the ability to fail fast and pivot to other approaches is extremely important in that. How do you invest in strategies and workflows that allow you to create modular workflows? Like maybe you change a model or an API, but the end user strategy doesn't change. So think about those when it comes to generative AI. The other thing that we get from a lot of customers is them getting swayed by a lot of information that's seen on the internet, but not bother about how all of that benefits certain use cases that they care about. Working backwards from the use cases has been one of the key important things that we've learned in our own experiences with customers. While there are a lot of models available, not all of them are actually applicable to the kind of problems organizations are trying to solve. So working backwards from key tenets of use cases is extremely important. I have talked about how data plays all of this role, but one of the things that data also does is differentiate you from the others. Only you have access to the data sets you own. So how do you make that as a key element in your generative AI strategy is extremely important. The other thing that we've seen customers utilize a lot of is the use of managed services from AWS, because there are some managed services that abstract that key decision-making point of which model is better. For example, Code Whisperer, it's a service that allows you to generate code based on instruction tests. You don't have to choose a model for that, but utilize a service. You saw Amazon Q being announced today, which allows you to create responses to a variety of questions on your own data source. That is where I think the value is. That's where the organizations are moving towards, and that's how you should think about adopting generative AI. Model choice is critical when you're building your own applications, but it's not the end of it. There's so much more beyond model choice that you have to think about. What is your data strategy? How do you scale out all of these applications at minimal cost? How do you give access, control governance, audit? All of these are things that you have to keep in mind, and those are not always just driven by just a single model. It depends on your entire strategy and your architecture. And then introducing governance policies, using all of the services that allow you to build all of these applications that can be interrogated when there is a need for policymakers to do so. You should think about adopting those strategies in your own services. So I want to end today by saying that we have been talking a lot so far about what and how. But one thing that makes this job the most fulfilling for myself is the why. And this is one of the things that we care deeply about. And the why is actually making differences in patients' lives. So this year, AWS decided to partner with Children's Brain Tumor Network. Here's an artwork by one of the patients named Cameron, who is a 5-year-old patient. And she drew a picture of her swimming, and she calls it her superpower. We are distributing pins, just like where you can collect them at the Venetian, where we are hosting a lot of different demos, and it's a pavilion where you can interact with a host of peer industry colleagues. You can also see a lot of demos. So these demos are available for you to interact with, including the one I showed you today. That was just one of them, the health agent. But you'll see drug discovery workbench. You will see a variety of chatbots being created with RAG using our services. You'd also see a lot of different healthcare use cases over there. So I encourage you to, if you have the time, go and check out all of the things that display at the Life Sciences Lounge. Lastly, I would say that there are a lot of sessions still going on that are specific to life sciences. My team is running, a session on, creating and fine-tuning protein models. So we are taking, AWS technologies like SageMaker and using workflow and distributing workflows that allow you to create fine-tuned version of those models. These are all hands-on workshops, so you can get access to the code. You can try it out for yourself. You can modularize it. You can customize it to your own liking. The other one is the scientific workbench environment. This is also something that resulted from a POC we did for one of the customers, and we are now making it open source for you all to access. You can get more details about these sessions by scanning the QR code over here. I'll leave it on for 2 seconds for you to scan, and then move on. All right. Thank you so much for spending the